Tyler, so excited to meet you. I'm obviously not Pastor John. I have hair and no Jordans. So I did wear Nikes, but no Jordans. He's away this week, and I'm so excited and honored and privileged to get to open up the series called Fragile Faith. It's French, I think. Or we get it, okay? Christmas story. You're like, do you make a Christmas joke? I love Christmas, even though it's May. We're starting this idea of fragile faith. And what we're looking at and going to walk through for the next, really all the way through the end of May, is this idea of building an anti-fragile faith, this idea of wanting to be able to build a faith that can stand tests and trials. And I love Rhonda's story. As she shared her story, there was pain and there was heartache before Jesus, right? But there was also pain and heartache after Jesus. But you even heard in her tone and even in her language, the difference of her and how God had prepared her for this. And she's never someone who I think would have looked to the limelight, looked to share her story like she did. But I love that she shared her story pretty recently, and it worked perfectly in with the idea of wanting to build not a fragile faith, but an anti-fragile faith. We're gonna open up in Matthew 7. Matthew 5 through 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. It's any preacher's dream. Man, if I could preach a sermon one day that captivates just a little bit of what Jesus did on the Sermon on the Mount, like, man, God, I've made it. He preaches this sermon, and he covers so many different topics, and near the end, this is what he says, verse 13. You can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad, and its gate is wide for many to choose the way. But the gateway to life is very narrow, and the road is very difficult, and only a few ever find it. But the gateway to life is very narrow, and the road is difficult. Only a few ever find it. Well, last week was Easter, which is great, and so I think it's kind of funny to me that we talk about Easter, he's risen, and this week, hey, life is hard. Like, good job, Tyler. So if you're taking notes, you can say life is hard. Happy Easter. Man, if you were here last week, it was an incredible Sunday. We saw people give their lives to Jesus in this room, in our Waymaker, in Midway. We saw people go all in with Jesus in baptism, and it was this awesome celebration, right? And now we're talking about, hey, life is hard. Hey, I found Jesus, but now I have cancer. But we have food trucks, so it should be a good day. But this is the reality of life. And the reality of the world is that what Jesus is saying here, hey, he preaches this sermon and he says, guess what? It's not an easy life. It's not an easy life. And he doesn't promise us really the kingdom of this world. And I think that's something we need to lock in real early this morning. Jesus doesn't promise a kingdom on earth, but he promises to provide the kingdom of heaven. And those look very different. He doesn't promise us to give us all of our desires, but really through that whole sermon, he's talking about this kingdom of God, the heavenly realm, the kingdom that's both here, but yet not here, still to come. And it's a hard idea to wrap our mind around, but it's something where he says, hey, it doesn't look like this. But there was a lot of expectations for Jesus. His followers even expected a triumphant king to come in to free them out of captivity of the Romans, but that's not what Jesus did, right? Jesus came to free us the captivity of our sin and our bondage. But expectations can be pretty detrimental to any relationship, right? And we all have expectations. I'm not just talking about expectations of God, but was it too much to expect a solid story through J.J. Abrams' sequel trilogies? Star Wars fan, right? I mean, could we just get a solid story? I'm nerding out up here. No, some expectations were up and down. Man, what we expect, what are some things? Oh man, vacations. I have high expectations for my vacations. Anybody else? And then you live out the vacation, you're like, that was nothing. One vacation in particular, I was actually preparing to propose to my beautiful wife. We were going to OBX. Her whole family had rented a big house And we were gonna propose, and I was gonna do it the first day we were there. They were doing family pictures, so we're gonna be out at the beach and like all dropped on one knee, super cute. And as that first day on the beach is going, it's super windy and it's kind of shadowy and dark. And the family's like, "Hey, I don't know if we're gonna do pictures." And I said, "Listen, I'm proposing today, whether we do pictures or not. You just need to know that because I can't go all week with this like anxiety that I have, right?" But so we're gonna do the pictures that day. It's Monday morning. And I have just this expectation, right? You're gonna walk out, man, take these pictures, it's beautiful. She's gonna look so pretty, I'm gonna look super handsome, solid, like, the foundation, the husband. And as we're walking to the beach, as if it couldn't have been planned any better, I step right through this giant cactus ball. Like the whole family's going. I step right, it goes through my sandal into my heel. And the funny thing is I have the ring in my back pocket, right? It's in the box, there's a little bulge, but like it's in the leg, the ring is in. And I'm like limping, I'm trying for Danielle not to see like, what's he got in his pocket? Like she already had probably figured it out. That's what she told me, she knew she was getting married. But like my expectations, it was almost as if God, hey, you're getting married, listen, there's gonna be some thorns along your way. Joking, it's been all roses. All roses. Life is hard though, right? But you have this expectation, right? And then we were expected to have we got through the engagement. It's so awesome. It's so pretty. We're at OBX. And if you remember in the news a couple years ago, or if you've ever been down past Hatteras, they had that old bridge and they built a new bridge. And in the middle of the night, they drilled the underwater power lines to the rest of the island. So we didn't have power Wednesday through Saturday. And so this giant expectation, we're sitting on the beach, kind of in this huge house, our whole family. We were all kind of ready to leave. And we kind of had we're gonna rough it. Like we're gonna grill, we're gonna just figure this out. It's Friday night, we're supposed to all leave Saturday morning. And I remember seeing on Twitter that there was a mandatory evacuation at 6 a.m. Saturday morning, which meant everyone from under Hatteras and down had to leave one lane, go up. And this is where the family was at. And this will tell you, I think, how the vacation had gone. Within 30 minutes of me reading this text message at 8 o'clock, or this tweet, the entire house was packed up at 8:30. Everyone was in their own cars and said, all right, we're leaving, goodbye. And everyone just went ahead. And it was a vacation I'll never forget, right? But I had different expectations. High expectations in life will always lead to disappointment, right? Even in our marriages, man, nothing is harder to overcome in any relationship is an unstated and an unmet expectation, right? You're thinking one thing and then all of a sudden another thing happens that just diverts your attention. It's not as serious as something in marriage, but there was a time I was eating wings and fries with a buddy of mine, a local restaurant, I won't say which restaurant, and I dipped my fries in ketchup. And I eat the fry. Instantly, I realize this isn't ketchup. Don't know what this is. It completely ruined my experience. And I asked the waiter, what is this? He said, oh, that's our signature olive ketchup. I was like, signature olive ketchup? This is a disaster. Do you know how different of a reality it is thinking you're dipping your fry in ketchup and then you get olive juice if you're not a big olive fan? Right? Just that small expectation completely shifted, never gone back. It's my least favorite restaurant. I'm not going to say what it is. But false expectations are hard for us to overcome. And the reality is, I think we have expectations of God and expectations of faith and expectations of our life that are born out of some lies or born out of some things that maybe we're told or we believe, and they create these expectations. The first one I want to talk about is this idea that Christians are always successful. There's this idea, Christians are always successful. And so what that creates is we expect to be successful because of Jesus. Now I'm talking about in life. We expect to be successful because of Jesus. I love to call this the Chick-fil-A fallacy, right? I love Chick-fil-A. But it's easy for us to look, they're Christians, so their business is great. Right? It probably has more to do with how they actually run their business that's based off of Christian values, absolutely. But how many businesses have been started with Christian values that didn't reach the heights of Chick-fil-A? But I think there's, in this culture, in the South, and the Bible Belt, the Bible buckle that is Lynchburg, there's this idea that, well, I'm a Christian, so I'm gonna be successful in my business. I'm gonna be successful in whatever ventures or whatever idea I wanna go at, I am going to be successful. Another lie I think we can believe, that our framework is always true. How I view, whatever I view is correct. What does this cause us to be? We expect to be the hero in any situation. A great philosopher said, "You're wrong, but you think you're right, and that makes you dangerous." Spider-Man, Civil War. Really, Iron Man said it to Spider-Man about Captain America. I also like to call this, for all my UNC friends, this is how you view yourselves. You're always the hero. Duke is always the villain, so you create the villain that you want them to be. Do you not see that? It's okay. Ohio State is always the hero, and I'm never gonna say that state up north. They're always the villain, right, Mike? They won this year, so we'll give them that. How about that playoff? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. We expect to be the hero. We expect that what I view about life is right. Politics, theology, human rights, whatever it is, how my family operates, how my in-laws operate, I'm right. Because that's just how I view things. Maybe it's how I was taught to view things. It's how I live. The last lie that I see us believing is life is supposed to be common and trouble-free. Life is supposed to be common and trouble-free. So we expect to be comfortable. We expect to be comfortable. We expect to live a life that is gonna be the white picket fence with the golden retriever, right? I'll retire to Hilton Head, amen? Sea Pines, whatever, you know? But life is common, it's trouble-free. I'm supposed to be comfortable. Well, last week was Easter, this week life is hard. And Jesus even begins, or what we read at the beginning of this, the idea that narrow is the way that doesn't seem common and trouble-free. But that's the picture that I think we believe, or the lie we believe about ourselves. And what does this create? And really the reality is, faith that's based on our own circumstances creates a fragile faith. So because I found my husband in college, or my wife in college, because, man, I got this degree and I got the job I wanted, life is good, God is good. A faith based on circumstances, though, creates a fragile faith. Why? Because if that is the root of my belief systems, of what's happened to me, then those are gonna come and go as seasons come and go. And so what we wanna begin to prepare is that this is actually nothing that Jesus has ever promised us. He's never promised us these things that I think we hold on to, that we will be successful, that how I view things will be right, that my life is gonna be easy and common free, and I'm gonna raise kids and they're gonna be awesome and wanna talk to me, and they're never gonna need to go to a counselor like I need to go to a counselor to talk about my parents, right? Life is never gonna be like that for me. And the reality of that is it creates a fragile faith. But Jesus doesn't call us ever to be comfortable. But I believe he calls us to be faithful. He calls us to be faithful, and we're gonna learn at what I view walking through difficult seasons looks like being faithful. Now, there's this idea that we're saying, man, there's fragile faith, but we don't want to create a fragile faith. What we want to create is this term that was coined by a man named Nassim Taleb called anti-fragile. Which doesn't mean that it's strong, doesn't mean that it can't break, but anti-fragile means something that benefits from volatility, shock, or stress. What does that mean? It means that it's a item, it's a material that when stress is applied to it, it bends, it kind of bows to it, but it doesn't break. And that when it comes back, its properties are different. It's no longer the same object it was. It's stronger, it's more durable, it's ready for different things. This is the faith that we want to create, an anti-fragile faith. Now, please, before I go any further, don't hear me say that life isn't fragile. That's not what I'm communicating. Life is incredibly fragile. Life is difficult. Your whole world can change in a moment. But how fragile our faith is needs to be met with an anti-fragile, opposite approach of our faith. Because how many people have we known who have walked through a hard season and maybe walked away from faith in Jesus, walked away from the church? Or maybe that's where you find yourself right now. There's questions that you just have not gotten the answers. There's a season of pain, a season of difficulty that you're even right now, as I'm speaking, you're starting to be a little fired up. Because what I'm communicating, maybe it doesn't fit directly in with what you've experienced or where you're at right now. Or maybe you're walking with someone who is in the season of, man, what do I believe and why do I believe it? Those are okay questions to ask, and this is actually a place where it's okay to be here and to ask these questions because we are all imperfect people journeying through this life. And Jesus talks a lot about this idea of walking through difficult seasons. And we're going to continue in Matthew 7. It's where we'll spend most of today, near the end of that passage. So he's already talked about narrow is the way, but now he sets up another picture. So Matthew 7, 24 through 27 says this: anyone who listens to my teachings and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and floodwaters rise, the winds beat against the house. It won't collapse. Why? Because it is built on a bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against the house, it will collapse in a mighty crash. Jesus, he loved to speak in these parables or these stories and paint these beautiful pictures. And, we have this picture of someone who builds their house on a rock foundation, right? Which represents high character and wisdom and strength and ultimately him as Jesus. And then there's another picture of someone who builds their house on sand, right? Kind of the idea that it would be easier to build your house on sand, right, than to put a rock there. It's maybe looks prettier, it's easier to work with than moving a giant boulder. So it's kind of the easy way, the selfish way, these two different foolishness and wisdom. And that's what Jesus says, right? If you grew up in church like me, you sang the song. Does anyone know the song? I already lost it. The wise man built his house upon the rocks, and the rain came down and the floods went up. You're like, man, Waymaker worship, Tyler, there it is. I have sang on stage. I've done it. I've done a lot of things on stage. Now I have sang. Check mark. Pastor John's not here. He's probably watching. He's like, he's singing. Yikes. But you grew up in church or any, you have that background, you sang that song, it's like, okay, man, what does that mean? That means, man, I'm gonna get saved, I'm gonna believe and follow Jesus, my house is built on solid rock, perfect. Got that verse down, Matthew 7, 24, moving on in life. But I think it can be a little bit more complicated than that. I think there's maybe two different approaches to this that you might find yourself in this morning. One is the reality that, sure, there's a little bit of a rock, a little bit of a foundation, but actually it's really not a foundation. It's more of a really pretty, beautiful piece in your garden, right? A nice rock feature that everybody sees, but really it's not a foundation of your life at all. But it's out there and it's seen. It's like, this is me. Yes, man, I check Christian on a census. I believe and follow Jesus, but it's more a part of the decor of my life than maybe the actual foundation institute that I go back and run all of my thoughts, all of my life through. Maybe that's where you find yourself. Or maybe if you're like me, there's absolutely, yes, there's a foundation of Jesus in my life, but there's also a lot of sand that my house is built on. That it's not just what I believed as a child in Jesus that I've built my life on. There's things outright that can look and we know are bad, right? Man, I have a foundation of drug abuse. Man, okay, that's pretty obviously, that's a tough one, right? Or, maybe there's some not so great moral decisions I have in life, and this tends to be a foundation, and I see how this kind of has a negative approach to my life. But then there are other things in life that we build our house on that I think in the moment we don't believe or know or understand the difficulties that it's gonna create in our life, right? Maybe financial success is a huge foundation of your life. But what happens when that financial success falls away? Right? Because at the end of the day, now there's a difference in financial success and having maybe a foundation of, I want to live a life that stewards finances well. But at the end of the day, you can't control if you keep your job or not. Right? You can't control if there's gonna be a global pandemic that's gonna close a business or gonna impact, or that there's gonna be medical bills that just weigh up, right? What if that financial success walks away or kind of begins to fall, that foundation just begins to fall away? My family's image, I think this is a huge one. How others view my perfect family, right? That we are this in the community, that my children act and dress like this, that they date and marry people that look and act like this, and we are this family, and you're gonna get our Christmas card, right? But then one thing happens, one person makes a decision that you don't connect with, and that foundation begins to fall apart. I think I could go on and find personal things that each of us would say, you know what, I actually have built some of my foundation of my life. Yes, my kitchen is built on Jesus, but maybe my office is built on my own pride at work, my own success in my career. And when we look at this passage, Jesus is talking, but he's in a narrative, but he's very clear that, hey, the rains and the floods are gonna come. Right? There's even an idea going back to narrow is the way. It's a difficult road. Hard times, trials are gonna come. Where is your life built on? What's gonna last? Are you gonna be someone that something happens? And you know what, this faith thing that I believed in church and I grew up and I went to Christmas Eve and Easter and I was in a small group and I served, but I'm hit with this devastating news like, Rhonda, I have cancer. God, where are you at? There is no God. God is dead. And we see this in culture. We see this in our families. We see this in our friends. There has to be an answer. But I think some of it is just built on our own expectations for who Jesus is, for things that Jesus has never promised us. But things like safety and security in life that we stand almost as a birthright because we believe and follow Jesus. And yet everything that Christ talks about is this life is hard. He goes so far to say, they killed me. What do you think they're gonna do to you? Life is hard. Life is difficult. But you know what? God is so good that even those places in our hearts, in our lives, those foundations of sand that don't always stand that test of time, he's so faithful and he's so good that maybe when some of those storms come and it shows there's some foundation issues, he helps us rebuild. And he's such a good God that he didn't just sit up in his chair in heaven and tell us what to do, but he climbed down from heaven. He got down on his knees and he did the hard work with us in his grace and his mercy. Say, it's okay, my child. I know you believe this. I know this is how you built your life, but let me help you. Let me guide you. Let me rebuild this part of your life that you thought you had so locked in, so under control. In his grace and his mercy, he helps us build back up. You know, there's this idea or this analogy that I've heard recently, and it kind of blew my mind. So they were out in the desert and they wanted to figure out how to build a place that could have trees or plants grow in places like the desert where they couldn't normally grow. create vegetation and life. And so they built this big dome, and they're doing all these tests. It's called Biosphere. I think Biosphere 2. I guess Biosphere 1 wasn't a great success. But Biosphere 2, I don't know the full history. And so they're trying to figure out how to grow trees, specifically in a desert climate, which seems difficult. But they actually did it. They found a way, and the trees grew. They grew strong, and they grew fast. Awesome. But they would come in, and they would notice that the trees started to just collapse in the dome. It's a big tree, fall down. So, they would do their hypothesis. Maybe we need to water differently. Maybe we need to change the soil a little bit. Plant the trees, and trees would grow really fast because they'd control the temperature and the water. And what happened? We'd get to a certain height. Everything would look good. Get to the same exact height, and all the trees would start to just collapse. Roots completely come out of the ground. All of them, left and right. And you know what they began to realize? The one thing they had eliminated completely in this dome was wind. They took wind away. And they realized that yes, the right soil, the right foundation, the right watering, the right sun, all of that's important to trees growing strong. But the only thing that is important to keeping trees standing up is the wind. Why? Because it blows on the tree, right? And you see the tops of the trees, they start to sway, and then they come back. And what that does, it causes those roots to grow deeper, to spread, to grow wider, and it actually begins to change the wood. They started to study this, and they began to see that this is actually, they started to call it a stress wood or reaction wood. The molecules in the tree started to change at these certain points so that the tree could bend and sway, and it became stronger. It became a tree that could grow to heights and carry its own weight. And I think that's so interesting because I don't know about you, but in my life, it can be so easy for me to minimize the pain that I'm walking through. It can be so easy to act like the people I interact with, life's good. Yeah, how you doing, Tyler? Oh, life's good. How's your marriage? Marriage good, can't complain, right? Life's busy, oh. But when we act like life is good and easy, I think it creates or maximizes actually the potential of our downfall. Because we've begun to almost block out that wind, right? We begin to block out those small things that push on us, that makes us stronger. And so when those big gusts, or even not even that big of a gust, man, it comes and down goes Tyler. Right? I've built my life on these expectations, on this foundation, and I act like, or I numb myself to the realities of my own life. And so it's pretty easy for someone to come in and just push over. Did God really say? You start walking through that first lie we see in Genesis. Well, does it really matter how I live my life? Does it really matter how I treat my spouse or my coworkers? Does it really matter, really matter how much I have to drink? Or what I do with my own personal sexual desires? Does any of that really matter? And we've built a foundation that, yes, well, I believe in Jesus. I give, I tithe, right? I was at Revival Week, but there's aspects of my life that, maybe I know they're there, maybe I don't know they're there. And then when the big one comes, the roots didn't stand a chance. But no matter where you're at, no matter how much wind a tree gets pushed on, sometimes a tree just still falls down. It's funny that I'm teaching this week. I haven't taught, I think, since August. And God has taken me and my family on a journey during that season. And I say it's funny because this wasn't planned that I would teach this well in advance. I'd been asked to teach another week before, and some scheduling stuff couldn't. But I believe that God ordained that this would be what I taught today. I remember back in the summer, I got to teach on the idea of celebration as a discipline. Maybe you're here for that. Maybe you remember that. I said, praise God, I have gas. Everyone brings it up all the time, referring to, of course, the gas crisis. But this idea of celebration and remembering and recognizing what God had continued to do in our lives. Because it's easy for us to forget the good that God does in our life. So like I said, God had taken my family on a journey. And in October, specifically October 27th, my wife and I, we walked in for our first ultrasound, and we were so excited, only to find out our worst nightmares that our baby had died. Those are those moments where faith is tested. Right? Nothing can prepare you for hearing those cries of your wife. Right? Of those moments of like, God, I just want to feel nothing ever again. I just want to pick up a bottle and never feel another emotion. There was parts of my foundation that was so secure on Jesus, and there were other parts that were secured on me. And I knew a part of that God had begun to bring up. To be really honest with you, God and I had a lot of conversations because I felt like I deserved so much more. God, I'm in ministry. I'm a pastor. I've sat and cried with so many of you. Been there. God, I don't deserve that. I've given my life to you. Not just as a follower of Jesus. I've said, God, you use me. I'll take myself out of the workforce. Use me for whatever you want. And this is my story. This is the pain that I have to walk through. And God is so good. He met me in my pain so many times. Through words of encouragement, through his quietness, through his disciplines. And as I was preparing all week for this, knowing that this was going to be a hard sermon, I wasn't going to get to be the happy, fun Tyler the whole time. It was hard for me to even map out, God, what do you want me to share about this? Life is hard and walking through this season. And it wasn't even really till this morning that I heard God say to me, because I know there are a lot of people in a lot of pain. I haven't forgotten you. I haven't forgotten your pain. He began to show me throughout this season, wait a minute, God. You gave your child for me? God, there's nothing I wouldn't give up for that baby to be back. But you laid Jesus down for me. What would I ever have deserved for that love? And he just was so kind and so faithful as I wrestled with my anger and my selfishness. And he revealed that pride. I felt like Job at the end of Job, where he realizes, God, I don't know how you put the sun where you do. I don't know how you keep the animals fed. Your ways are higher than mine. And just kind of fell in front of God in humility. And that's where God took me. That's where God brought me. And I wrestled often with this idea of, well, God has a plan, right? He's directing your steps. God has a plan. And I get the sentiment of that. But honestly, you know what that phrase makes me feel like? That I'm just a footnote. that where I'm at in my pain is just a footnote. God has a plan. You know, your pain that's a lot, but God is still good. And what I began to learn and grow is that phrase, and I understand its sentiment. Man, your pain is real, but God is good. That's an idea of optimism. And I get that sometimes that can work, right? Man, I was in a car accident, but man, it could have been worse. I get that idea. But for me, there's no optimism. Like, I lost my baby. Right? My wife had to go through multiple weeks to check to make sure she didn't have cancer. Where's the optimism in that? There is no optimism in that. That's death. That's a taste of death. That's the sting that I never experienced in my heart. But there's this quote in this idea, but before I get to that, I wanted to say that yes, God has a plan, but I want us to remember that God's perfect plan was disrupted in the garden. That what we've endured, God never intended for us to endure, but because of our own sin, because of the sin of Adam and Eve, sin and death entered into this world. And so yes, God had a plan, and that perfect plan was disruptive, and now we are a part of God's redemptive plan in life. And there's so many times that I myself blame a good God for the work of the enemy. And I think, God, why wouldn't you do this? I've seen you save babies. Why wouldn't you save my baby? And God, that was in his love and his to say, don't you understand that this is not what I desired for your life? That this is a scheme of the enemy, but trust me, what he has intended for harm, I am gonna use for good. And I'll be honest, I don't know what that good is. I don't know if it's this. We're still in the midst of this pain. You know, it was so frustrating. Free sample of baby formula got delivered to our house this week. It's like, man, just like sand in the eyes, just hitting that wound, right? Because I knew what the enemy was doing. He was trying to take me back to a place of so much pain and bitterness. I talked about optimism. I want to read this quote from John Mark Comer. He says, optimism and hope are not the same thing. Optimism is a self-help trick where you tell yourself things are going to get better. Hope is that God is with us and all will be made well. See, life is tough and life is hard. And Jesus never promised us anything different. Instead of adding that but God, I like to add and God. Life is hard and God is good. God's goodness isn't attached to my own personal success, my family's health, my wealth. God's goodness rests solely in his perfect nature. I'm removed from that situation. But I say and because I never want to minimize the pain that any of us are walking through, that so easily with Christianese, we can just throw dirt in a wound, but God. But like, don't you understand I'm hurting here? Don't you understand I have sleepless nights? See, my pain and his goodness, they're not connected. And it can be hard when we talk about this idea and we have this image, but Jesus, you came to free everybody. And I think we can really believe that God promised, but he never did. God never promised to remove pain from this world. That was never a part of what Jesus had talked about. But what does God promise? God promises to redeem all pain. And so why would we talk about life is hard the week after Easter? Because that's the reality of this world, that the tomb is empty and there's a celebration. However, life on this earth is still hard and painful, but know that it is going to be redeemed.
Not on my time, but on his time. We already read it today. Victoria, our worship leader, she read this verse. I don't even think she knew it was in my notes. John 16:33. I have told you this so that you have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. You will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart that I have overcome the world. This idea couldn't be more connected to the gospel. It couldn't be more of the truth that is this human experience, that there's pain and there's suffering. However, he has overcome the world. And there was a lie that God really revealed to me that I had believed in my heart. You know, there's for all of us, I think there's an idea in faith that just seems it's just too big. It's what keeps you up at night. For me, it's eternity. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But it's okay. His ways are higher. My mind is finite, right? But I start thinking, God, you always were. You always will. Like, it just, okay, it wraps my head a little bit. And I kind of had this idea of, you know what? I love you, Jesus. I love that you died for my sins. I love that you're a personal God. I love the life you've given me. And it's been a great life. I'm so satisfied with this life that, you know what? If when I died, that was just it. It was darkness, but I got to experience goodness on this earth. Like, I'm okay with that, because it kind of scares me. What do you mean? I'll worship you in heaven forever? Like, those kind of ideas, like, it just gives me unrest. It gives me peace. Like, it takes peace away. And just my mind can't wrap around this idea of eternity. What's after heaven, right? And everyone has the idea, right? But what does that really look like? And you know what God really taught me in this season was that I am so not okay with this world. I am so unsatisfied with the pain and the sickness that my sin and your sin causes, that the sting of death that I'll forever feel. But one day, when I stand in your presence, that sting of death that I feel even in this moment will be a memory I can't even recall. Because you have overcome the world. And the reality is, if we want to build an anti-fragile faith, it has to be built on the rock that is the empty tomb. It has to be at the core, not just a prayer we've said, but that this is everything I run my life through, that tomb is empty, that where I deserved death, he brought life to me, and that I am his servant, and I'm gonna walk through this. That has to be the core for the rest of the series as we build. How do we build this faith that doesn't just at the first sign of trouble fall over, that rests in the fact that the foundation is the empty tomb, that he is who he said he is, and he did what he said he was gonna do, and that he's preparing a place for you and me. Now, I know this has been a really heavy day, and I wanted to kind of bring the end of this into some places you can find yourself, because not all of us find ourselves in the midst of pain. I think we can find ourselves in, let's call it vacation mode. Life's great right now. Man, kids are healthy, marriage is good, job is good, right? Like, everyone has their troubles and their trials, but pretty much I would say I'm in vacation mode. Here's what I would tell you. One, enjoy that. Right, walk on the beach, enjoy the sun, spend time with God's goodness, right? Dip your feet in the water. But what I want to tell you is be ready for that undertow, right? Don't build a life of expectation that this is my life. Build a life of expectation of serving the Lord. And if you're in those seasons, care and love for those who aren't. Because some of you may be in survival mode. The pains of life are hard and life is difficult. And what are the answers for you? That's a hard thing to give. But there's two things I want to say, and I've already said them. Hold on fast and tight to the reality of the empty tomb that we celebrated last week with everything you have. And I want to go back to that tree that pushes and bends in the wind, that when that wind is pushing, that everything in that tree is doing to just stand up, to hold on for a few more seconds, right? And that's what I want to tell you. Just hold on. If you feel like you can only hold on a day longer, hold on a day longer. Hold on. Because I tell you that one day that wind's gonna lighten up a little bit. That how you feel right now, that cloud of darkness, of shadow, of just pain, of it's a constant thought, it will get easier. And the other thing I want to say, which is hard to do, but is that picture of Job. Humble yourself before the Lord. Even in the midst of your pain, humble yourself. That God, I don't know why you didn't give the miracle that I asked for. Doesn't make sense to me. I would have done it differently. But I know that whatever the enemy intended for harm, you can turn to good. And that I trust your ways, God. And lastly, you might be in recovery mode. You're kind of coming out of that. What I want to say is lean into those lessons learned. Don't just ignore that season of pain, but go through that. Find a counselor, find a trusted friend. Journey through, God, what did you teach me? Build a monument of that river that you crossed. And then lean back into those things of God, the disciplines. Maybe it's small. And then the picture I have is just take a walk. Just go back for a walk with Jesus and allow him to begin to rebuild your faith. And as I close, what I want to do is ask all of us to stand. And we're gonna recite a passage, Psalms 23 together. Because here's where I want to bookend this. I talked about at the beginning that one of the last sermons that I had preached was on celebrating who God was. And then I walked through pain that I never thought I could walk through. And here's what I want to say. He's the same God. He is the same God before October 27th that he is today. But I want to tell you, I have a richer and fuller understanding of what his love is. And this is the psalm that shows us he's the same God that walks us through green pastures, that stands with us in those valleys. And then we're gonna worship. And if you're walking through the storms, if you need to step out in just a moment of surrender to say, I need people to surround me during this time, would you come down front? And would you allow the family of God to come around you, to lift your arms up? Psalms 23, verse 1. Read it with me. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid. For you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever.